Attention Commander players, my name is Commander Jinsdale and today we are going to be talking about brotherly love. Specifically, the Shattergang brothers, and their love of all things explosive. This dangerous gaggle of goblins know exactly how to shake up a board state, and they're here to share their delightful destructiveness with everybody at the table. For just one, a black, a red, and a green, you get yourself a 3/3 with 3 very simple abilities. For the low cost of 2 and a black and sacking a creature, you make each opponent sack a creature. For 2 and a green and sacking an enchantment, you make each opponent sack an enchantment. And for 2 and a red, you do the same but for artifacts. These brothers have been fighting for board state equality since their release in the Commander 2013 precons. And with newfound companionship in the form of Ikoria the Collector, we're going to put together a deck jam-packed with lands, creatures, and no doubt in its ability to jund them out. The central theme of this deck revolves around Ikoria himself, as to have him as our chosen companion, we need to meet his deck building requirements. In this case, all the non-land cards in our deck need to share a card type. For us, that card type is creature. 62 of them in the deck to be precise, alongside 38 lands. With this requirement met, we get to cast Ikoria once from outside the game, and once he hits the field, we get to choose a card type, and for as long as he stays in play, each card we cast with the chosen type gets discounted by 1 generic mana. Now the awesome part about choosing creature as the type all our cards share is that throughout the years we've received a number of artifact and enchantment creatures that'll let us leverage all of the Bros effect to grind out our opponents and hopefully earn us a win in the end. Since a lot of our deck's synergies centered around sacrificing our own stuff, most of the creatures included have either an effect that triggers when they come into play, an effect that triggers when they leave play, or an effect that lets them sack themselves or others for value. While being locked into creatures cuts us off from running the classic Cultivates and Skyshroud claims for ramp, cards like Solemn Simulacrum and Wood Elves do the trick even better, since we can sack them at a later time after they've triggered their ETB. We also run the trio of Leadmere, Coppermere, and Ironmere, as they're useful mana dorks early game that can be used as either an artifact or creature late game, once we no longer need their mana for the purposes of the Shattergang's activated abilities. We also run Burnished Heart and Secure Tribe Elder, 2 cards which fit in perfectly with this deck's theme of mass sacrifice, and can be used to trigger some of our win cons that I'll be touching on later in the video. With all the sacrificing of our own stuff we're going to be doing, we need a way to generate some kind of card advantage, so we don't just end up empty-boarded and empty-handed. Moriok Replica does the trick by acting as a Night's Whisper on a stick, and with a deck entirely composed of creatures, it would be a mistake not to run Beast Whisperer, who nets us a card every time we cast a creature spell. Sapling of Kolfanor plays a similar role, in that it's an indestructible body which, whenever it attacks, reveals the top card of our library, and we get to put it into our hand if it's a creature. Then we lose life equal to the card's attack, and gain life equal to its toughness. Tireless Tracker makes a clue for us every time a land enters play under our control, which we can either sack for 2 mana to draw a card, or save for later use with our commander. And Erebos, the Bleak-Hearted, and Korvold, Fakehurst King reward us with cards when our stuff dies, or in the case of Korvold, whenever we sacrifice any permanent. Just be careful, if the only permanents you control other than Korvold are lands, you'll have to sack one when he enters the battlefield and every time he attacks. He is a very hungry dragon. Speaking of hungry dragons, we also play Vivictus's Maudie the Dire, as another thing all the other cards in our deck have in common is that they're all permanents. So we can always ensure that when we declare an attack with them, we're guaranteed to replace what we make ourselves sacrifice. Also, Vivictus just deserves to see more play in general. Real underrated card with a pretty unique effect. With all the stuff being put into our graveyard, it makes sense to run at least a couple sources of recursion to buy back or reuse the creatures we sacrifice throughout the game. The most powerful of the bunch being Marin of Clan Nel Toth, who gains us an experience counter every time another creature we control dies, and at the beginning of our end step, lets us return target creature in our graveyard directly to play if its CMC is less than or equal to the amount of experience counters we have. Otherwise, we still get to return the target to our hand. Coffin Queen lets us pay 2 and a black and tap her to put a creature from any graveyard into play under our control for as long as she remains tapped. But we can abuse this effect by just sacrificing the thing we bring back, letting us untap with her each turn to begin the reanimating all over again. Felden of the Third Path does something very similar for our deck, making a copy of a creature card in our graveyard and putting it directly into play. The neat thing about this effect is that the token Felden creates is actually an artifact creature, which makes it extra useful as fuel for the Shattergang brothers. Salvager of Ruin also works nicely in our deck, as it's an artifact creature that can sacrifice itself to return target permanent from our graveyard that was put there this turn to our hand. You can play the Salvager out early to buy back a fetch land or secure a Tribe Elder, or hold on to it for later and let it sit on board as removal insurance for your favorite permanent. Speaking of removal, just because we're mono creatures doesn't mean we can't run ways to interact with our opponent's stuff. Ravenous Chupacabra and Noxious Gear Hulk deal with our opponent's creatures, the latter even netting us some life in the process. Acidic Slime melts down pesky artifacts, enchantments, and lands for us, while Woadfall Primus can deal with any non-creature permanent, giving us trouble. And it even has Persist, which, when it dies, if it doesn't have a -1/-1 counter on it already, it's return to play with one, letting us nuke another thing in the process. We also run Steel Hellkite, a massively powerful artifact creature with flying that lets you pay X to blow up each non-land permanent with a converted mana cost of X controlled by a player damaged by Steel Hellkite this turn. Activate this ability only once each turn. I can feel all you token players watching this sweating profusely just at the mention of this devastating dragon. Massacre Girl can also be used to dispatch an entire board in a glorious chain reaction of death, giving all other creatures -1/-1 until end of turn, and causing a delayed trigger, which gives everything another -1/-1 every time a creature dies for the rest of the turn. Usually, if a board state's big enough and there's 1 or 2 1-toughness creatures lying around, this effect just reads, put every other creature in play into its owner's graveyard. But if the board is exclusively populated with bigger creatures, you can still utilize her effect by playing her, letting her trigger resolve, then activating the Shattergang Bros effect, re-triggering her for each creature that gets sacrificed this way, since Massacre Girl's effect doesn't care how the creatures die so long as they die after her effect resolves. We also run Graveyard Removal in the form of Agent of Erebos, an enchantment creature who nukes target player's graveyard whenever it or another enchantment card enters play under your control, and the duo of Timoret and Scavenging Ooze, which you can dump mana into to selectively devour cards from any player's graveyards, and even gain you some life and grow the Skoos if the cards they exile are creatures. Now then, the way the deck closes out the game. I wasn't kidding earlier when I said this deck has no issues jutting people out. With cards like Reassembling Skeleton, which can be returned to play tapped from your graveyard for only 1 and a black, then immediately resacrificed by the Shattergang Bros, to keep chipping away at your opponent's board states, 1 creature at a time. Kroxa, Titan of Death's Hunger, also plays a similar role, except for attacking their hands instead. And perhaps the king of the board denial game is Ophiomancer, who makes a snake on each upkeep if you don't already control a snake. Then, between each player's upkeep, you can sack the snake the Mancer makes with Shattergang Bros effect, and completely lock down your opponent's ability to put creature-based threats into play, keeping the way clear for your own threats to end the game. Alternatively, cards like Blood Artist and Zulaport Cutthroat drain our opponents each time a creature dies, which starts to pile on the pain really quickly when our deck consists almost entirely of things that die or make other things die, just the way Jund would want it. My favorite way to win with this deck though is with Mazarek, Kraul Death Priest. For 3, a black and a green, you get a flying 2/2 with the effect, whenever a player sacrifices another permanent, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. This card can single-handedly turn even your smallest creatures into colossal threats, since you can get up to 4 triggers off of it with a single activation of any of your commander's 3 abilities. This has been a pet card of mine since I started playing Commander, and I don't intend to stop including it in decks of mine anytime soon. Combined with a Pentavis for optimal effect, allowing you to take 1 mana and a counter off Pentavis to make a 1/1 Pentavite. Then, using any of your sacrificial outlets, you sacrifice the 1/1 Pentavite, triggering Mazarek, and putting a 1/1 counter on all of your creatures, including the Pentavis, putting you right back where you started but with 1 less mana, and an extra counter on each creature you control other than Pentavis. While this isn't an infinite combo, it very easily can be if you add in a Pitiless Plunderer, which makes a treasure token for you whenever another creature you control dies, which you can sacrifice to make a mana of any color. Anyways folks, I hope you enjoyed my unique take on this classic Jund commander. If you liked the video, leave me a like and consider subscribing so you can catch more of my content in the future. Also, leave me a comment down below telling me what you want to see covered next on the show. As always, the full deck list can be found in the description box below the video, and until next time, at ease. Actually, really quickly folks, before I forget, I'm doing this improvised, off the script, off the cuff here for a second. But this is my first video in a series of videos that I'm going to be doing, each covering a build-around of the new cycle of companion cards from Ikoria. There's going to be a little poll that should be on screen up in the top right or bottom right, like a sidebar, where you can vote, cast your vote, see who you want me to cover next. I'm going to cover all of them, but you guys get to weigh in on which ones that you want to prioritize seeing next. Yeah, but without further ado, this time, until next time, at ease.